She's not family tonight. My father's voice carried farther than the music, and every conversation around the engagement party seemed to stop at once. She's only here because your mother insisted. Don't mistake her silence for dignity. She walked away from her own people when things got difficult. No one corrected him. Not my relatives, not my sister, not even the man standing beside her with an engagement ring still catching the light. I'm Bennett. I remember staring at the bubbles rising inside my untouched glass because it felt easier than looking at the faces pretending not to enjoy my humiliation. The only person who didn't laugh was my sister's fiancé. His hand reached toward mine with practiced politeness. Then his fingertips brushed the old scar crossing my wrist. He stopped breathing for a second. His expression changed so quickly it almost frightened me. Recognition. Not sympathy. Recognition. I had no idea what he thought he'd discovered. 2 days earlier, I'd driven home after nearly 6 years away. The house looked smaller than I remembered, freshly painted and carefully landscaped, as though every flower had been positioned to convince strangers that nothing inside had ever been broken. I parked beside my father's new luxury SUV and switched off the engine. The quiet felt unfamiliar. Combat zones were loud. Silence always made me suspicious. My duffel bag landed heavily against my shoulder as I stepped onto the driveway. Before I reached the porch, the front door opened. My father didn't smile. His eyes traveled over my boots, my weathered jacket, and the faded canvas bag that had followed me across more countries than I cared to count. "You'll come through the side entrance," he said. I glanced toward the open doorway behind him. "Your mother had the carpets cleaned yesterday." That was all. No welcome home, no hug, just instructions. I nodded once and walked around the house without arguing. I'd spent enough years taking orders from people whose respect had to be earned. Following one more didn't cost me anything. The kitchen smelled of rosemary and furniture polish. My younger sister Claire stood arranging flowers in an expensive vase. Her engagement ring flashed before I noticed her smile. She hugged me carefully, never letting my jacket actually touch her dress. The embrace lasted only long enough for anyone watching to believe we were close. As soon as she stepped back, her expression hardened. "Ethan's parents will be here tonight," she said quietly. "Please don't make everything about where you've been." I wasn't planning to. And maybe avoid military stories altogether. I wasn't planning that either. She relaxed only slightly. "They're sophisticated people." I almost laughed. Apparently, surviving wars had become poor manners. She returned to arranging flowers while I carried my bag upstairs. The hallway looked unfamiliar. Family photographs had been replaced by oversized paintings. My old bedroom door remained, but nothing behind it belonged to me anymore. The walls had been removed to create an enormous dressing room. Designer handbags occupied shelves where my books once sat. Glass cabinets displayed shoes where my bed had been. For several seconds, I simply stood there. No one had warned me. Not because they forgot, because nobody thought I deserved to know. I found an empty corner and lowered my duffel beside a stack of shopping boxes. One carton tipped over. Papers slid across the hardwood floor. I crouched automatically, gathering them before they became wrinkled. One envelope had my name on it. Curiosity outweighed manners. Inside were old banking records. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at. Then I noticed the account number. It was mine. The savings account my father had opened with me when I was 16. Every weekend shift at the diner. Every birthday check. Every overtime payment before I enlisted. I remembered counting every dollar because college had seemed possible if I worked hard enough. The final statement showed a balance of 0. Every cent withdrawn. The signature authorizing it belonged to my father. The date pulled another memory out of hiding. Claire crying downstairs because an investment she'd begged for needed rescuing. Dad insisting family helped family. Back then, I'd believed he'd found the money somewhere else. Instead, he'd emptied my future. I sat there much longer than I should have. The paper trembled slightly between my fingers. Not because I wanted to scream, because I couldn't. Anger is loud. Real disappointment isn't. Real disappointment quietly rearranges the way you remember your entire childhood. I folded the statements carefully and slipped them into my jacket pocket. Evidence mattered more than outrage. Downstairs, the doorbell rang. Dinner began exactly on schedule. The table looked like something from a magazine: crystal glasses, perfect silverware, candles that smelled faintly of vanilla. My chair sat near the kitchen door, slightly apart from everyone else. Close enough to belong, far enough to remind me I didn't. Conversation revolved around Claire's business plans, wedding venues, and future grandchildren my parents already seemed certain would arrive. I listened more than I spoke. Whenever someone asked about my life, another person answered first. She moves around constantly, still trying to figure herself out. The military wasn't really the right fit. Each sentence sanded away another piece of the truth. Then Uncle Martin leaned back in his chair. "I heard they kicked you out," he said between bites of steak. "That true?" The room became unnaturally still. Claire sighed before I could answer. "It wasn't exactly her choice," she said softly, sounding almost embarrassed for me. "Things happened overseas. She left before everyone else." She never actually used the word. She didn't have to. Everyone at the table heard it anyway. Coward. My father continued cutting his steak without correcting her. His silence carried more weight than her accusation. I looked at my plate. The knife rested beside my hand. For one reckless second, I imagined throwing every ugly truth onto the table. The missing money, the years of ignored letters, the birthdays forgotten. Instead, I placed the knife down gently. The small metallic sound echoed through the dining room. Across from Claire, Ethan finally spoke. Not to accuse me, not to defend me, just one quiet question. "Which unit did you serve with?" Claire answered before I could open my mouth. "I don't think that matters anymore." But it clearly mattered to him. He wasn't watching my face, he was studying everything else. The calluses across my hands, the unconscious way I sat with my back to the wall, the measured rhythm of my breathing whenever tension filled the room. His expression grew increasingly thoughtful, like someone trying to solve a puzzle that refused to match the story he'd been given. When dinner ended, everyone drifted toward coffee and dessert. I remained where I was for another minute, my hand resting over the folded bank statement inside my pocket. I had come home expecting distance. I hadn't expected theft. And judging by the look Ethan gave me before leaving the dining room, I wasn't the only person beginning to suspect that someone in my family had been lying for years. Rain rolled in before sunrise, wrapping the coastline in a gray mist that blurred the cliffs beyond the backyard. By afternoon, the weather had settled into a cold wind that never seemed to stop moving. Claire insisted it was perfectly dramatic for engagement photographs. She changed outfits twice before we left. My mother handed me a leather tote overflowing with makeup, extra shoes, bottled water, and a blanket. "You'll carry this," she said without looking at me. "Claire shouldn't have to." I didn't argue. Some habits survive long after uniforms disappear. The photographer wandered ahead, searching for better light, while Claire posed near the edge of the bluff, smiling more at her phone than at the man she was supposed to marry. Every few minutes, she inspected the screen, erased photographs she disliked, and demanded another round. Ethan complied politely, but something about him had changed after dinner. He smiled because people expected him to. His eyes never did. I stayed well behind them, listening to waves strike the rocks below. Eventually, Ethan drifted away from the photographer and walked toward me. He stopped beside the weathered fence overlooking the ocean. Neither of us spoke immediately. The silence felt comfortable. It reminded me of long patrols where conversation mattered less than paying attention. Without turning toward me, he asked, "How long were you overseas?" "Long enough." That's not an answer. It wasn't supposed to be. He gave the smallest smile. "You don't trust me." "I don't know you." "Fair." The wind lifted loose strands of my hair across my face. He waited, patiently, like someone who understood that pushing harder usually made people say less. Finally, he asked, "Did you ever serve in northern Jordan?" The question caught me off guard, not because I'd never been there, because almost nobody knew I had. Certain operations never appeared in public records. I looked toward the ocean. I've been in a lot of places. He studied me for several seconds before nodding once. I thought maybe I was mistaken. He sounded unconvinced. Another powerful gust swept across the bluff. My jacket sleeve slipped halfway up my forearm before I caught it. Too late. The scar was exposed. It stretched across my wrist like a twisted white rope, uneven and ugly against my skin. Most people glanced away after seeing it. Ethan didn't. His entire posture stiffened. What happened? 3. Steel cable. Military recovery? I looked at him. He wasn't guessing. He already knew. Before I could answer, my Aunt Evelyn came puffing up the walking path, complaining loudly about the climb. "I swear this family will kill me before the wedding does." She stopped beside us, hands on her knees, trying to catch her breath. Then she noticed what Ethan was looking at. "Oh," she said quietly. Her eyes moved from my wrist to my face. "They never told you, did they?" Claire looked up from the photographer. "What are you talking about?" Aunt Evelyn frowned. "The medal." Claire's smile disappeared. "Evelyn." "No," my aunt shook her head. "I'm tired of pretending." She turned toward Ethan. "She received one after that rescue overseas. Your future father-in-law packed it into a storage box because Claire was upset everyone kept talking about Nora instead of her graduation." The words seemed to hang in the wind. Nobody moved. Claire recovered first. "Oh, please, that's not what happened." "It is exactly what happened. You remember it wrong." "I was there." Claire laughed too quickly. "It was years ago." "It was still cruel." The photographer looked everywhere except at us. Even strangers recognize the moment a family stops pretending. Claire marched across the grass until she stood directly in front of her aunt. "You always take her side." "I take the truth's side." "There you go again." "No," Evelyn answered. "There you go again." For the first time since I'd returned home, someone else was carrying the argument. I didn't know whether to feel grateful or ashamed. Claire turned toward me. "If you wanted attention, you could have just asked." I almost answered. Instead, I watched Ethan. He wasn't looking at Claire anymore. His attention remained fixed on the scar crossing my wrist. He looked disturbed, not by the injury, by whatever memory it had awakened. The drive home passed in tense silence. That evening, guests filled every room of my parents' house. Champagne flowed, music floated through the halls. Laughter bounced between polished walls that had heard very different conversations only hours earlier. I stayed near the balcony doors where the cool air slipped inside each time someone stepped outside. Distance had become instinct. Several of Claire's friends gathered nearby. None of them realized I could hear them. "I thought she'd be different." "What do you mean?" "I don't know. Less intimidating?" "I heard she couldn't handle deployment." "Claire said the army discharged her." "I feel bad for their parents." One woman lowered her voice. "It must be exhausting having a daughter like that." Claire joined the group, carrying another glass of champagne. For one hopeful second, I believed she'd stop them. Instead, she sighed dramatically. "My parents have spent years trying to help her." Someone touched her arm sympathetically. "That's difficult." "It really is." Claire looked almost tearful. "Trauma changes people. We tried counseling, we tried finding her work. She just pushes everyone away." It was an impressive performance, carefully measured, close enough to concern that nobody questioned it. A few guests looked toward me with open pity, others with quiet judgment. Neither bothered me as much as the familiarity of it. Claire had been rewriting me for years. Most people only knew her version. I slipped onto the balcony. The cold evening air hit my face. For a few blessed seconds, all I could hear was the ocean. The balcony door opened behind me. Ethan stepped outside. He closed the door gently, muting the music. "I've been trying to remember something all day," he said. I folded my arms. "And?" "I finally did." His voice was calm, but his expression wasn't. "Several years ago, I attended a briefing before deployment." I waited. There was a rescue operation discussed. Official details were limited. My heartbeat slowed instead of quickening. Training does strange things to fear. It involved an engineer team trapped after a structural collapse. He looked directly at my wrist. The report mentioned one soldier refused evacuation until everyone else was pulled out. I said nothing. The medical photographs included an injury almost identical to yours. The wind shifted between us. I never forgot it. I stared toward the dark water below. Lots of people have scars. Not like that. No. Neither of us spoke again. Inside the house, someone tapped a champagne glass with a spoon, calling everyone together for speeches. Ethan remained where he was. So did I. For reasons I couldn't explain, it suddenly felt as though the engagement party wasn't moving toward a celebration anymore. It was moving toward a collision. And everyone inside was still smiling, because they hadn't realized the ground beneath them had already started to crack. The speeches began with laughter. My father welcomed everyone, thanked them for making the trip, praised Claire's accomplishments, and joked about finally gaining the son he'd always wanted. People laughed on cue, crystal glasses lifted, someone started recording with a phone. I stayed near the back of the room, convinced I could disappear if I remained quiet long enough. I should have known better. My father spotted me before he finished his toast. He raised his glass in my direction. "And for anyone wondering," he said with an easy smile, "our older daughter is simply visiting. Civilian life has suited her much better than military life ever did." A few uncomfortable chuckles drifted through the room. He continued before anyone could change the subject. "Some people aren't built to stay when life gets dangerous." The words landed exactly where he'd intended. Every face turned toward me. Claire lowered her eyes just enough to appear embarrassed. My mother stared into her wine glass. No one challenged him. Then Ethan set his champagne down. The soft click of crystal against wood somehow silenced the room more effectively than my father's voice ever could. "I have a question," he said. My father smiled. "Of course." "When did Nora leave her unit?" The smile hesitated. "I'm not sure of the exact date." "But you're certain it happened?" "That's what we were told." "By whom?" Silence. Claire answered instead. "People from town heard about it." Ethan looked at her calmly. "So, rumors." "They weren't rumors." "Then who confirmed them?" No one spoke. He let the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable. Then he turned toward me. "Would you mind if I asked one more question?" I shrugged. "You've already asked several." "Were you ever charged with abandoning your post?" "No." "Court-martialed?" "No." "Disciplined?" "No." He nodded slowly. "I didn't think so." Confused whispers spread through the guests. My father's confidence began slipping. "You seem unusually interested," he said. "I am." Ethan faced everyone. "Years ago, I reviewed operational briefings before deployment. One case stayed with me because it was used as an example of leadership under impossible conditions." He glanced toward me. I never knew the soldier's name. The room had become completely still. The report described someone who remained inside a collapsing structure while others were evacuated. My Aunt Evelyn quietly covered her mouth. The rescue succeeded because one person refused to leave. Ethan looked back at my father. That person received a commendation. Nobody moved. Claire laughed nervously. You're confused. I don't believe I am. She folded her arms. You've barely known her 2 days. I don't need 2 years to recognize military protocol. He stepped closer to me. The scar on her wrist wasn't accidental. His voice remained level. It matches the injury photographs attached to that operation. I reached into my jacket pocket before I could lose my nerve. The folded bank statement had felt heavy against my chest all evening. Now it felt heavier. I wasn't planning to say anything tonight. Every eye shifted toward me. But I found this yesterday. I unfolded the papers carefully. My father and I shared a savings account when I was younger. My father's face lost its color. Nora. I thought I'd saved enough for college. I held up the statement. I was wrong. Several guests leaned closer. The account was emptied. My father took one step forward. We can explain. I'd like to hear it. His mouth opened. Nothing came out. Claire spoke first. Dad borrowed it. I was never asked. He meant to replace it. He didn't. It was for the family. I looked at her. I was family too. Those 5 words hurt more than I expected. Claire's confidence faltered. For a while, she whispered. Things were difficult. So you took what belonged to me? We all sacrificed. I almost laughed. No. The room was so quiet I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. You sacrificed nothing that wasn't yours. My mother suddenly sat down. She looked exhausted. Not surprised, just tired. I told him not to do it, she said softly. Everyone turned toward her. I told him we'd never recover if we kept pretending. My father stared at her in disbelief. Margaret. You always believed she'd come home eventually. Tears gathered in her eyes. You just hoped she'd never ask questions. The confession seemed to drain whatever strength remained in him. He lowered himself into the nearest chair. For the first time in my life, he looked old. Not powerful, not intimidating. Simply tired. Claire's voice cracked. You've ruined everything. I met her eyes. No. I folded the bank statement again. The lies did that. No one applauded. No dramatic speeches followed. Guests quietly looked away, embarrassed to have witnessed something so deeply private. Several left without finishing dessert. Others offered awkward goodbyes. Within half an hour, the house that had seemed so full felt strangely hollow. Later that night, I stood alone on the back porch with a mug of coffee that had already gone cold. The ocean sounded different after midnight, less angry, more honest. The screen door creaked behind me. Ethan stepped outside, carrying his coat over one shoulder. I wanted to apologize. For what? I believed the rumors before I met you. Most people did. I shouldn't have. I looked out toward the darkness beyond the yard. It would have been easier if I'd defended myself years ago. Why didn't you? I considered the question. Because I thought coming home one day would be enough. He nodded. I've learned something about silence. So have I. It protects people. It also protects lies. Neither of us spoke again for a while. The wind carried the smell of salt across the porch. Inside the house, I could hear quiet voices, not arguing, not celebrating, just speaking honestly for perhaps the first time in years. When dawn arrived, I packed my bag before anyone else woke. I left the bank statement on the kitchen table, not as revenge, as a reminder. Some debts can't be repaid with money, only acknowledged. As I started my old SUV, I looked once in the rearview mirror. The house was still there. The memories were still there. The hurt would probably stay longer than I wanted. But for the first time since I'd turned into that driveway, I wasn't leaving because someone had pushed me out. I was leaving because I finally understood that carrying other people's version of my life had become heavier than any pack I'd ever worn. And some journeys don't begin when you come home. They begin the morning you stop asking people who never saw your worth to finally recognize it.